8. The goober was beautiful when he ran. His long arms and legs moved flowingly and flawlessly, his body floating as if his feet weren't touching the ground. When he ran, he forgot about his acne and his awkwardness and the shyness that paralyzed him when a girl looked his way. Even his thoughts became sharper and things were simple and uncomplicated. He could solve math problems when he ran or memorize football play patterns. Often he rose early in the morning before anyone else and poured himself liquid through the sunrise streets. And everything seemed beautiful, everything in its proper orbit, nothing impossible, the entire world attainable. When he ran, he even loved the pain, the hurt of the running, the burning in his lungs, and the spasms that sometimes gripped his calves. He loved it because he knew he could endure the pain and even go beyond it. He had never pushed himself to the limit, but he felt all this reserve strength inside of him. More than strength, actually, determination. And it sang in him as he ran, his heart pumping blood joyfully through his body. He'd gone out for football, and there was a good feeling when he caught one of Jerry Renault's passes and outrun everybody for a score. But it was the running he loved. The neighbors would see him waterfalling down High Street, carried by the momentum of his speed, and they'd cry out, "Going for the Olympics, Goob?" or "Got your eye on the world record, Goob?" And on he'd run, floating, flowing. But he wasn't running now. He was in Brother Eugene's homeroom, and he was terrified. He was 15 years old and 6'1½" and too old to cry, but tears blurred his vision as if the room was underwater. He was ashamed and disgusted with himself, but he couldn't help it. The tears were from frustration as well as terror. And the terror was different from any other kind he'd ever known, the terror of a walking nightmare, like waking up from a bad dream in which a monster was gaining on you and breathing a sigh of relief as you realized you were safe in your bed, and then looking toward the moonlit doorway and seeing the monster stalking toward your bed. And knowing you'd stumble from one nightmare into another, and how do you find your way back to the real world? He knew that he was in the real world at this moment, of course. Everything was real enough. The screwdrivers and the pliers were real, so were the desks and chairs and the blackboards. So was the world outside, a world he had been shut away from since 3 o'clock this afternoon, when he had sneaked into the school. Now the world had changed, had grown blurred with days leaving, and then purple at dusk, and then dark. It was now 9 o'clock, and the goober sat on the floor, his head against the desk, angry at his damp cheeks. His eyes stung from strain. The vigil said he was allowed to put on a small emergency nightlight. Each classroom was furnished. A flashlight was forbidden because it might look suspicious to other outsiders. The goober had found the job almost impossible. He had been in the classroom 6 hours and had only finished 2 rows of desks and chairs. The screws were stubborn, most of them factory tight, resisting the twist of the screwdriver. "I'll never get done," he thought. "I'll be here all night and my folks will go crazy and it still won't be done." He envisioned himself being discovered here tomorrow morning, collapsed in exhaustion, a disgrace to himself and the vigils and the school. He was hungry and had a headache and felt that everything would be all right if he could only get out of here and run, hurtle himself through the streets, free from the terrible assignment. A noise from the corridor. There was another thing. It was spooky. All kinds of noises. The walls spoke their own creaky language. The floors crackled, motors hummed somewhere, the humming almost human, enough to scare a guy to death. He hadn't been this scared since he was just a kid and woke up in the middle of the night calling for his mother. Thump. There. Another noise. He looked with dread toward the doorway, not wanting to look but unable to resist the temptation, remembering his old nightmare. "Hey, Goober," the whisper came. "Who's there?" he whispered back. Relief swept him. He wasn't alone anymore. Someone else was here. "How you doing?" A figure was advancing toward him on all fours like an animal. The aspect of the beast, nightmare after all. He shrank back, his skin hot and prickly like the onset of hives. He was aware of other figures crawling into the room, knees scraping across the floor. The first figure was now in front of him. "Need some help?" The Goober squinted. The kid was masked. "It's going slow," Goober said. The masked figure grabbed the front of Goober's shirt and twisted hard, pulling him forward. He could smell pizza on the kid's breath. The mask was black, the kind Zorro wore in the movies. "Listen, Goober, the assignment is more important than anything else, understand? More important than you, me, or the school. That's why we're going to give you some help, to get the thing done right." The kid's knuckles dug hard into Goober's chest. "You tell anybody about this, and you're through at Trinity, got that?" Goober gulped and nodded. His throat was dry. He was happy beyond belief. Help had arrived. The impossible had become possible. The masked figure raised his head. "Okay, fellas, let's get going." One of the other fellows raised his face, also masked, and said, "This is a gas. Should have been get to work," the guy who was obviously the leader said. He also let go of Goober's shirt and pulled out his own screwdriver. It took them 3 hours. Nine. Jerry's mother had died in the spring. They had been staying up with her nights, his father and some of his uncles and aunts and Jerry himself, since her return from the hospital. They came and went in shifts that final week, everyone exhausted and mute with sadness. Nothing more could be done for her at the hospital, and she was taken home to die. She'd loved her home so much, always had some project underway, wallpapering, painting, refinishing furniture. "Give me 20 workers like her and I'd open a small factory and make $1 million, his father used to joke. And then she got sick and died. Watching her ebb away, seeing her beauty diminish, witnessing the awful alteration of her face and body was too much for Jerry to bear. And he sometimes fled her bedroom, ashamed of his weakness, avoiding his father. Jerry wished he could be as strong as his father, always in control, masking his sorrow and grief. When his mother finally died, suddenly at 3:30 in the afternoon, slipping off quietly without a murmur, Jerry was overcome with rage, a fiery anger that found him standing at her coffin in silent fury. He was angry at the way the disease had ravaged her. He was angry at his inability to do anything about saving her. His anger was so deep and sharp in him that it drove out sorrow. He wanted to bellow at the world, crying out against her death, topple buildings, split the earth open, tear down trees, and he did nothing except lie awake in the dark thinking of her body there in the funeral home, not her anymore, but a thing suddenly cold and pale. His father was a stranger during those terrible days, like a sleepwalker going through the motions, like a puppet being maneuvered by invisible strings. Jerry felt hopeless and abandoned, all tight inside. Even at the cemetery, they stood apart from each other, a huge distance between them, even though they were side by side, but not touching. And then at the end of the service, as they turned to leave, Jerry found himself in his father's arms, his face pressed close to his father's body, smelling the cigarette tobacco, the faint odor of peppermint mouthwash, that familiar smell that was his father. There in the cemetery, clinging to each other in mutual sorrow and loss, the tears came for both of them. Jerry didn't know where his own tears began and his father's left off. They wept without shame, out of a nameless need, and walked together afterward, arm in arm, toward the waiting car. The fiery knot of anger had come undone, unraveled, and Jerry realized as they drove back from the cemetery that something worse has taken its place. Emptiness, a yawning cavity like a hole in his chest. That was the last moment of intimacy he and his father had shared. The routine of school for himself and work for his father had been taken up, and they both threw themselves into it. His father sold the house and they moved to a garden apartment where no memories lurked around corners. Jerry spent most of the summer in Canada on the farm of a distant cousin. He had fallen into the routine of the farm willingly, hoping to build up his body for Trinity and football in the fall. His mother had been born in the small Canadian town. There was a kind of comfort walking the narrow streets where she herself had walked as a girl. When he returned to New England in late August, he and his father fell into a simple routine: work and school and football. On the field, bruised and battered or grimy and dirty, Jerry felt as if he was part of something, and he sometimes wondered, what was his father part of? He thought of that now as he looked at his father. He'd come from school to find his father napping on a sofa in the den, arms folded across his chest. Jerry moved soundlessly through the apartment, not wanting to awaken the sleeping figure. His father was a pharmacist and worked all kinds of staggered hours for a chain of drugstores in the area. His work often included night shifts, which meant broken sleep. As a result, he developed the habit of falling off into naps whenever he found a moment to relax. Jerry's stomach was weak from hunger, but he sat quietly down across from his father, now waiting for him to awaken. He was weary from practice, the constant punishment his body took, the frustration of never getting a playoff, never completing a pass, the coach's sarcasm, the lingering September heat. Watching his father sleep, the face relaxed in slumber, all the harsh lines of age less defined. He remembered hearing that people who had been married a long time began to resemble each other. He squinted his eyes, the way one inspects a fine painting, searching for his mother there in the face of his father. And without warning, the anguish of her loss returned, like a blow to his stomach, and he was afraid that he would faint. Through some nightmarish miracle, he was able to superimpose the image of his mother's face on his father's, and for a moment the echo of her sweetness was there, and he had to go through all the horror of visualizing her in the coffin again. His father awakened, as if slept from sleep by an invisible hand. The vision vanished, and Jerry leaped to his feet. "Hi, Jerry," his father said, rubbing his eyes, sitting up. His hair wasn't even mussed. But then, how could a stiff crew cut get? How could a stiff crew cut get mussed up? "Have a good day, Jerry." His father's voice restored normalcy. "Okay, I guess. Another practice. One of these days I'll get a pass off." "Fine." "How was your day, Dad?" "Fine." "That's good." "Mrs. Hunter left us a casserole, tuna fish. She said you liked it fine last time." Mrs. Hunter was the housekeeper. She spent every afternoon cleaning up the place and preparing some kind of evening meal for them. She was a gray-haired woman who constantly embarrassed Jerry because she insisted on tousling his hair and murmuring, child, like he was a third grader or something. "Hungry, Jerry? I can get it ready in 5 or 10 minutes. Hit the oven and there it is." "Fine." He was throwing one of his father's fines back at him, although his father didn't notice. That was his father's favorite word, fine. "Hey, Dad." "Yes, Jerry?" "Were things really fine at the store today?" His father paused near the kitchen doorway, puzzled. "What do you mean, Jerry?" "I mean, every day I ask you how things are going, and every day you say fine. Don't you have some great days or rotten days?" "A drugstore is pretty much the same all the time, Jerry. The prescriptions come in and we fill them, and that's about it. You fill them carefully, taking all precautions, double checking. It's true what they say about doctors' handwriting, but I've told you that before." He was frowning now, as if searching his memory, trying to find something that would please the boy. "There was that attempt at hold-up 3 years ago, the time that drug addict came in like a wild man." Jerry made an effort to hide his shock and disappointment. Was that the most exciting thing that had ever happened to his father? That pathetic hold-up tried by a scared young kid brandishing a toy pistol? Was life that dull, that boring and humdrum for people? He hated to think of his own life stretching ahead of him that way, a long succession of days and nights that were fine, not good, not bad, not great, not lousy, not exciting, not anything. He followed his father into the kitchen. The casserole slid into the oven like a letter into the mailbox. Jerry wasn't hungry suddenly, all appetite gone. "How about a salad?" his father asked. "I think there's lettuce and stuff around." Jerry nodded automatically. Was this all there was to life after all? You finished school, found an occupation, got married, become a father, watched your wife die, and then lived through days and nights that seemed to have no sunrises, no dawns, no dusks, nothing but a gray drabness. Or was he being fair to his father? To himself? Wasn't each man different? Didn't a man have a choice? How much did he know about his father, really? "Hey, Dad." "Yes, Jerry?" Nothing. What could he ask him without something crazy? And he doubted whether his father would level with him anyway. Jerry recalled an incident that had taken place years ago when his father worked in the neighborhood pharmacy, the kind of place where customers came to consult the druggist as if he possessed a doctor's certificate. Jerry had been hanging around the store one afternoon when an old man entered, bent and gnarled with age. He had a pain in his right side. "What should I do, Mr. Druggist? What do you think it is? Look, press here, Mr. Druggist. Do you feel the swelling there? Is there a medicine to cure me?" His father had been patient with the old man, listening sympathetically, nodding, stroking his cheek as if he were preparing a diagnosis. He finally convinced the old man to go see a doctor. But for a moment there Jerry had seen his father acting the part of a physician, wise and professional and compassionate, a regular bedside manner even there in a drugstore. After the old man's departure, Jerry had asked, "Hey Dad, did you ever want to be a doctor?" His father glanced up quickly and hesitated, taken by surprise. "No, of course not," he said, but Jerry had caught something in his manner, in his tone of voice that ran counter to his answer. When Jerry tried to pursue the subject, his father suddenly became very busy with prescriptions and stuff, and he never brought up the subject again. Now, seeing his father presiding in the kitchen, getting supper for crying out loud, such a far cry from being a doctor, and his wife dead, and his only son full of doubts about him, his life so pale and grey, Jerry was plunged into sadness. The stove signaled, "Casserole ready." Later, preparing for bed and sleep, Jerry looked at himself in the mirror, saw himself as that guy on the common must have seen him the other day, square boy, just as he had superimposed his mother's image on his father's face. Now he could see his father's face reflected in his own features. He turned away. He didn't want to be a mirror of his father. The thought made him cringe. I want to do something, be somebody. But what? Football. He'd make the team. That was something, or was it really? For no reason at all, he thought of Gregory Bailey.